Hi everybody, welcome today. In today's show, we're going to be doing the future of technology in transportation with Bryan Mulligan. So thank you for joining us, Bryan.
Thanks, Pete.
I know some of you signed up for another webinar at the Nimitz corridor. We had to reschedule that. And the reason for that is actually we've got the DOT director, Ed Sniffen, that's going to be joining on that session. That's going to happen in July. You'll all get an email from us that will actually come out and tell you the exact date of that. I'm just going to hand over to Jessica now, who's got a couple of housekeeping for us.
Welcome, everyone. If this is your first Applied Information show, we just want to go over a few things so that you can get the best viewing. We want you to enable speaker view on Zoom if you haven't already. If you are having any quality issues or you would like to view this in HD, I'm going to pop a YouTube link into the chat box. It is legit. That is from us. You could go ahead and click that and view it that way if that is better for you. And then we really want to encourage you guys to ask some questions. We have Bryan here with us. He's really going to be talking about the future, and let's challenge him. Let's really see if he knows what he's talking about. And so feel free to pop those Q&A questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and we will go through those as we go along.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'm just going to take on a little high level of some of the subjects we're going to go over, and then I'm going to be handing over to Bryan, who's going to be talking about some real exciting things. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is NASA. So, NASA is moving away from being an owner-operator to now shared service customer. What does that mean for our industry? Then we're going to go on to outcomes-based contracting. What is outcomes-based contracting? We're going to talk a little bit about cloud computing in terms of, how is that getting used in the transportation industry? And then we're going to go on to the Internet of Things. And finally, we're going to talk about, well, how do we actually do this today? How do we actually go and implement this technology today? So from that, what I'm going to do is hand over to Bryan and have Bryan talk to us about the NASA and what's been going on in NASA. Can you explain to us why that's so interesting?
Thanks, Pete. It's always an interesting thing as a technology guy and a technology company to talk about the future, because the answer is none of us know exactly what's going to happen, but we do know that the pace of change is upon us. And for everybody watching out there who thinks, wow, the pace of change is fast, well, you just got to realize that the pace of change is the slowest right now that it's going to be for the rest of your life. So in technology, all we know is things are accelerating. So what we've got to do is cast around and look for examples of things that have happened where we can see a pathfinder to the future in transportation. And it's opportune to talk about this because it was just a week ago Saturday that SpaceX launched 2 astronauts to the International Space Station on behalf of NASA as a NASA contractor. But what was so profound about this is the change in the NASA business model. And so what NASA have done is moved away from being an owner-operator, which is the conventional transportation model of the DOTs and cities and so forth, being owner-operators of the technology, to now they actually contract for the results. They literally bought tickets on the SpaceX bus to the space station. In fact, NASA is a transportation organization. We do horizontal transportation, and they just do vertical transportation. So you can think about it like that they were actually a transit user of a shared service to the International Space Station. So, but it's one thing to hear it from me, but I'd like you to hear it from Jim Bridenstine. And so we've got a little clip queued up by Peter to show you Jim Bridenstine explaining this paradigm shift in NASA's approach. So let's hear what he had to say.
Administrator Jim Bridenstine, thanks so much for joining us today on what is a very historic moment, not just for NASA and SpaceX, but for the country. Carl just mentioned first attempted orbital human space flight from U.S. soil in almost a decade, but also the first time a private space company has been involved in attempting to launch humans to orbit. It really represents a paradigm shift for NASA from operator to customer. How does this redefine American priorities in space, and what does it mean for the agency?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are launching a new era in human spaceflight. So there's a number of milestones that are being achieved here. We are launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil for the first time since the retirement of the space shuttles back in 2011. But as you said, we're doing it differently than we've ever done it before. NASA is not purchasing, owning, and operating this vehicle. We have partnered with commercial industry to buy a service to deliver our astronauts to the International Space Station. NASA wants to be a customer. We want to be one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace for human spaceflight. But we also want to see numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation. The goal being we need to drive down costs and increase access to space.
What is the cost to do this mission, and how does it speak to savings that are baked into having a public-private partnership like this?
That's a great question. This mission represents the final test flight. This is an end-to-end test flight. We cannot forget this is a test flight. But this is the final test flight in a $3.5 billion investment by NASA to get to this point where we are ready to launch American astronauts from American soil yet again. Of course, part of that contract is 6 launches in what we call, crew launches. And then beyond that, it's going to be negotiable. And it's that element when we get into negotiating where we have numerous providers that are competing on cost and innovation and safety. That's where we're going to get the significant cost savings. But right now, we are buying access to the International Space Station, and we've been doing this for 9 years. We've been buying access from the Russians. They're now charging us about $90 million per seat. We believe we're going to be significantly less than that going forward, and we're going to be spending the money right here in the United States of America.
So what NASA did there was just not only the technological accomplishment of moving away from being an owner-operator to being a purchaser of services.
This relationship.
But the method of how they did that was actually quite profound, and it started 10 years ago. And the first thing that they were going to do is do the what they call the commercial resupply of the International Space Station, where there are no lives involved. But what that involved for the first time is NASA, whose political support in Congress is based on having facilities all over the nation. And what they did is they said, well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to contract with private companies where we've got no control over in which states this rocket is built, how the rocket is built and so forth. We're going to be in a purchaser of services, of establishing requirements and establishing oversight of the process. It worked so well that what they did is in 2014, as you heard, they moved over to the crew supplier. Well, now they're actually going to fly humans with all the risks involved in putting humans on top of this continuous explosion. And that culminated in the NASA launch. But with such commitment and such change of culture within NASA, it's been nothing short of miraculous and fabulous. And there's another clip which I'd just like to show you, is Jim Bridenstine talking to Elon Musk, and where he's explaining it, this isn't a one-off. This is the way NASA is going to do business going forward.
NASA has been sufficiently meaningful to where we are now looking at how we do all of our business models. And that includes how we're going to resupply the gateway. It includes how we're going to get to the surface of the moon. This business model has proven to be very effective, first on commercial resupply, now on Commercial Crew. I will tell you that the relationship has proven to be tremendously valuable, and that the business model has proven to be tremendously valuable.
One can see that NASA's made this commitment in response to the commercial forces that we can do more with less by collaborating with the private sector. Now, what I'm going to do, for those of you who know me, this comes as no surprise, I'm going to be quite provocative about this vision of the future, because the pace of it, we're not in control over. There are many DOTs, cities, counties, states, and consultants who are very comfortable with the current way of doing business, where the purchaser of the assets becomes the systems integrator, the operator, and the maintainer. But we've demonstrated that there's, in the cell phone business and various other industries, and now with NASA, there's just a fundamentally better way of doing business. And that's going to take a paradigm shift in the transportation industry to be able to recognize that the commercial partners offer more than just a supply of assets. They offer innovation, they offer capabilities to be able to significantly drive down costs and significantly reduce timescales. And those pressures are just going to exist in the transportation market, and it's coming at us 1,000,000 miles an hour, so we have to be ready.
So how does this actually come into the surface transportation market? In other words, how can we go and have a city, a DOT, do outcomes-based contracting with the private sector right now?
So what I'm going to deal is with outcomes-based contracting in the next topic. That's a topic all by itself. So let's maybe discuss that in detail in the next topic. But what you do as a technology company like us is we look at all these market forces in other industries, and then we prepare ourselves for them in the future. So as I say, I don't know when that will happen, but it's inevitable because it's happened in so many industries. It's inevitable that it's going to happen in our industry. And so there's quite a great illustration, which we're just going to show you, of something that SpaceX did with private capital that changed the cost equation of accessing space. And that is this. And you can see the beauty and elegance and technological sophistication of how SpaceX made themselves $40 million. Now, why that's so significant is not the $40 million every time they land a booster, but there was never any doubt in their contract with NASA who owned the rocket. That wasn't NASA's rocket that they landed. It was SpaceX's rocket. And it wasn't because they're actually going to make a lot more money. It's they're going to lower the cost of access to space. Just like everybody else, everybody's chasing them. They're not the only guys who can land rockets. Blue Origin can land rockets as well, not to orbital class. But what that shows is by collaborating with the private sector, you can make massive savings. And it's not just pennies on the dollar, it's like savings to 10% on the dollar. And that's the future that excites me, where we can lower the cost of technology and the infrastructure to 10% of the current values. And that should be our goal, because then there's not an argument about how and when to deploy technology. It becomes ubiquitous, like smartphones.
So how does the smartphone industry play into this whole, because they kind of were the industry that sort of, 10 years ago, no one even knew what a smartphone was, to today, which is not a long time in technology, where it's synonymous that people have multiple different devices. How does that apply into our market and area?
What it involves is that you, as the DOT, or the user or the public representative, the political class, focus on requirements. What do you need to do to deliver a better service for your citizens? Get out of the design business. Get out of the asset management business. Get out of the owner-operating business. Focus on the requirements business, and then how are you going to implement oversight so that you can make sure people deliver the services that your customers, your citizens need. That's the big insight, is to get out of the detailed design business which comes with an owner-operator, and get into the purchasing of services, like NASA have done. This is probably a good time. Jessica, I don't know whether any questions or anybody's raised anything yet?
No questions yet.
All right, so that's good and bad. It means that everybody thinks I'm crazy or not, but off we go. The outcomes-based contracting.
Yeah, so you've talked about, you've alluded to outcomes-based contracting. How does that play into this role? Because it's a symbiotic kind of relationship. How does that actually play into this with DOTs and how they should actually come out with contracts?
Right, and so that's an interesting thing that's going to involve a realignment and a transition of skills of everybody in our industry. Now, I can sit here and say, well, what we're going to do is just, change the whole industry. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, the answer is NASA changed the industry of their industry. And so they succeeded in the last 6 years, and with very dramatic support of NASA, re-engineered their processes. The same lies ahead of us. Now, the pace of this change is I don't know, but it's going to be for everybody. So what I'm talking about is that when cities are looking at solving a problem, let's say transit signal priority, I just made that up, but they want the buses to work better. Typically what they would do is figure out what assets do we need to purchase in order to make the buses work better. But actually what they want to do is they want to achieve a 10% more reliable travel time for their buses. That's the requirement for their citizens, and put that kind of RFI and RFP out with those requirements. Generally you can write them on a page, but that's going to change be a change of skills in the DOT and the city. It's going to be a change of skills in the consulting community, who have to write outcomes-based contracting. And that's going to be a change of skills in the contracting community. Now, the civil engineering contracting community is essentially based on an adversarial method of contract. You write a spec, the contractor complies with the spec, doesn't comply, everybody fights about it and its compliance or not compliance. The business of metrics, of how well does the system work, is the key part of this new paradigm, which the consulting community are going to have to acquire the skills to be able to do effectively. Likewise, the contracting community, the teaming community, companies like ours and our channel partners and our distributors, we're now teaming in a performance-based contract where we actually end up being paid not on the box we provide, but how well does it work to solve the problem that the city or the state DOT is focused on. And in fact, just yesterday, this is all quite opportune, it happens as we speak, Jim Bridenstine and Elon Musk exchanged quite an interesting pair of tweets. I don't know whether we've got them. Can you bring them up here, Peter?
Yeah, we'll bring them up. In other words, this is how NASA obviously brought up, in terms of what they're looking at. And, that would be with, let's see if we get this up here.
And so the top part of it, I'm going to read this. Peter's unfortunately zooming in. But it's the cost-saving success of commercial crew program is based on NASA establishing high-level requirements and letting private companies innovate. That's the parallel with what we're talking about here. For the Artemis moon base, Artemis is their program to get to the moon. NASA will establish a cost per ton delivered and once again let private companies innovate. I mean, that's just huge. The requirement is to get to the moon and establish a cost for getting there. And it's not how well you try, but how many tons you delivered. That's huge. Elon Musk replied. And for those of you who know me talking about outcomes-based contracting, it's quite funny you use the terminology as well. But the outcomes-based contracting with multiple competitors is vastly better than cost-plus, especially in sole source. Now that's a NASA-specific thing, as the former rewards results and the latter rewards waste. Now, Elon Musk has been pretty blunt here. But outcomes-based contracting should be applied broadly within government. The difference in results will be incredible. And I think that that's something that's quite profound. And the reason why it's quite profound is for our folks who are anxious about how this potentially might unfold. The folks who's saying, yeah, but where has this been used in government? There's now a shining example to talk to where this has been achieved and achieved with great success, and there's no turning back on it, and that's what we're facing in the future. And so it behooves all of us to figure it out, to train ourselves up, to experiment with some small contracts, and then bigger and bigger contracts as this outcomes-based contract becomes more and more just the standard way we do business.
Can you give, are there any examples of a nice outcomes-based contract in transportation that you've seen?
Actually, not a lot. What applied information does and how we go to market, as you know, is with cloud computing and wireless telematics all packaged into a price of something you buy. So it's a mixture of services and an asset in terms of a field device. So that's somewhere on the way to cloud computing, to outcomes-based computing, because people judge our cloud offering not by who owns the software. Who owns Glance? Applied Information owns Glance. Our customers use Glance under a license, under a shared license, with security and all the rest. And so that's something of this move towards an outcomes-based contract, which kind of would be a segue into the cloud computing part of things. Again, Jessica, anybody got any questions yet, or everybody still chewing on what I've had to say?
We've got a couple questions here. So the first one is from Girish. He said, great points, Brian. Ultimate goal should be to reduce costs through improved efficiencies with private partnerships. DOTs need to find better ways to procure to encourage innovation. Please share your thoughts.
Yes and hell yes. In other words, I do understand that it's not as easy as it looks to come up with a new method of procurement and so forth. But it's inevitable that we're going to have to. And that's where our folks and our friends in the consulting community are going to have to join with us to figure out what these new contracts look like. It's non-trivial. Everybody's been used to the civil engineering method of contract, how you purchase concrete and asphalt, and buying technology the same way. Often we give IT departments a bad rap. But we can learn from IT departments who've been buying service level agreements, software as a service for the last couple of years, and their successes and failures in how those contracts have been placed, which provides a role model for us on the ITS, or Intelligent Transportation System side. So that's how I see that unfolding, is we're all going to move there together.
Great. Brian, so we have a couple more here from Aaron. I think you kind of addressed this in your last answer, but the concept of outcome and performance-based contracting has faced years of resistance. How to overcome? A key issue has been procurement law reform at the state and federal level. What are the first steps?
the first steps, in my view, is for the cities to lead. We've seen that in any number of places and ways, that the cities have flexibility that the states and the federal government don't have. Now, there's trade associations, and as you know, I'm active in NEMA and the chair of the transportation section, and we go and make our pitch to the Federal Highway Administration and the US DOTs, but it's very hard to get change at the federal level. We have to achieve that through the political process, through lobbying, through Congress, through your state capitals, and governors. And so this is how you persuade folks to move towards new models. But the key part of that is to start off with some successes to talk to. And the successes to talk to would be in the cities. So I would encourage the city folks who are listening and your consulting partners is figure out how to do this, and then we'll use that as a model to take it up to the states, and from the states to take it up to the federal level. So it's going to be from the bottom up, not from the top down, in my view.
And there's also one other thing to add there, Brian, is there is one city that we've seen in outcome based, which was from the city of Atlanta, where they had a really good outcomes based contract. And that's the only one that I know of, but it was a very simply written contract where they got exactly what they wanted in the end.
Yes, and so perhaps that's an example which I'd sort of forgotten of how this is achieved in a small way. And this was the North Avenue Smart Corridor Initiative that the city of Atlanta did, where they wanted to have an outcome of connected, autonomous vehicles. They wanted to have adaptive traffic signal control to test that out. And they got a collection of contractors together, and they said it all better work properly, and it's got to work properly on September the 17th or whatever the date was, because that's when our opening and our press event was. So they established a hard end to the project, and all the contractors who were normally suppliers, who were normally competitors, they all worked towards this common goal and very successfully achieved a very innovative solution, not only technologically, but with an innovative method of contract. Jessica, any others?
Yep, we got one last one here. It says, will outcomes-based contracting work so well when the client does not know exactly what they want? Perhaps the more iterative approach works better under those conditions, where the client is firmly in the loop. What do you think?
I think that the client being firmly in the loop is absolutely essential. But we all got to recognize what the client, in this case, the city, county, state, the US DOT, do. Everybody wants save lives, improve traffic. So we've all got the same common goal. So the requirements, at whatever level they're written, the customer needs to have the confidence. He's what it's called the demand driver. So the city is creating demand for technology by focusing on, I want the buses to work better. And there's some great examples, depending on your political persuasion, and we're not political, but some parts of the country want health outcomes, better health outcomes for underserved communities. That's their goal, to reduce the transit time and increase the availability of medical resources to citizens. And we measure that. And so what we can do is team with others to be able to deliver solutions that meet the political need. We as a technology company, we know one thing for clear. We don't understand what the public wants. That's the political process in America. So I know it sounds bold, but every time you focus on a technology from the government side, you always get caught in the trap. And I've got some little show and tell here, which might be an example. Turn around the other way. But for those in the connected vehicle space, this is a DSRC radio, and this is a cellular V2X direct radio. And we've been arguing about these radios for the last 20 years. But the point being is, who's the city who might say, Well, actually, what I want is a series of applications delivered by connected vehicles. I want to reduce accidents with this application. I want to do paramedics with that application. I want to make the buses work better with that application. And I want to make the children safer and the school buses safer with that application. Deliver me a solution over the next 5 years to implement that where every car can access it. So the point being is when you reduce it to applications, you can write them down on one page, and then folks like ourselves and others have to team and compete to out-innovate each other to deliver the application at a fraction of the cost of the city or the state doing it themselves. I think that's the magic in it all.
That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, you know, when you think about it, there's so much that, you know, companies like ourselves and other companies can really innovate. And this is that kind of contracting mechanism that we can really establish that's going to actually allow, in exactly the same way NASA's done, where we're seeing rockets landed, we can do the same thing in the transportation industry. So, you know, I urge everybody, reach out, you know, talk to your cities, talk to the DOTs, and talk about outcomes-based contracting, because I really do believe it's a better way of contracting to actually achieve results. While I'm talking about that, you know, one of the things, there was another massive contract with the Pentagon, and I'd like your view on that, Brian, which was the Jedi Contract. And it's showing that the Pentagon is now moving the way from an owner of assets to actually moving everything to cloud computing. Can you talk us through that?
Sure, and that's kind of an interesting segue into the whole issue of cloud computing. And that's to do with the business of resources. We've got a little somewhat provocative slide here, you know, this is a $10 billion Pentagon cloud computing contract. You can't overstate the implications of this. And the reason being is that when it comes to cloud computing, a lot of, you know, especially when we started, you know, applied information technology a number of years ago, well, what about security? What about escrow? What about this? What about that? What about my custom features? And essentially the topic is called what about? And so and in the technology business, that's called creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, some of these are legitimate concerns, and they started being legitimate concerns. And then you have to look for models about how folks have done this. Now, the interesting thing about what the Pentagon did is that their cloud computing contract is not only for back office functions, it's for warfare services. Wow. So that indicates that the Pentagon's analysis of security means that cloud computing services are more secure than the old way of doing things. So the fact they're spending $10 billion means that they think that the costs are lower than what they would have spent. And so that's something that's kind of the transportation industry at the state DOT and the federal level has been quite slow to adopt through legitimate concerns of resilience and security and so forth. But what these other markets are showing, and it'd be one thing if I said, yes, but there's a great market to show. You know, in the past you got a disk with Microsoft Office on it, and you put it in your computer. Well, now now you don't have anywhere to put it in your computer apart from that small but obvious problem because the CD has gone away, or the DVD player. But more the point is that market moved to be an on-demand shared business of auto-updating software But for folks to say, yes, but that's not, security. That's not, really difficult stuff. And that's where this model with the Pentagon has said, well, that's completely at the other end of the street. We're somewhere in the middle. And so this is where your IT departments can be a real resource to you in the transportation department, because they understand how this is done. And for those folks in the consulting side, you better understand this too, because you're going to be expected on behalf of your clients to write cloud computing contracts that folks can bid on, where the customer never actually owns the software or the servers, they just get the service.
And this is kind of where the market's going to be going, because if the DoD is doing contracts like this, there's definitely going to be, this is going to filter down into the transportation side. We've already seen this with a number of contracts going out with cloud-based computing, but it's really where it's going. Less and less people are, the security side is one of those things that come up. But if the DoD is, contracting with Microsoft or Amazon or whoever it is, they've got the built-in security. It's built into the servers and all the rest, and security is important, but it's an outcome-based contract where cloud computing is 10 times cheaper than going to I'm going to go buy servers and computers and put it all on, where I'm going to have 1,000 servers in my Department of Traffic. Let's rather just have a cloud server where we access all that information.
Correct, and that's been something quite interesting. So when ITS started, it started off as a generally in freeway management systems. And at that time, you built server rooms, and everybody had their own servers and an IT manager and so forth. And then you had custom features and so forth. And in the intervening years, we've seen a model emerge that actually the computer's up there somewhere. And that the ownership of the intellectual property remains with the provider, but the folks who use that by license, there's a process of whereby there are two things that are important. The first one is the concept of oversight. This sounds like a Wild West out there, but it isn't. The oversight, which are the skills that the city and county and state and the consulting community need to acquire, involves service level agreements, involves uptimes and availability. It involves customers like ourselves demonstrating how we achieve those uptimes. And so all of these skills are emerging into our market, and it'll either be slow or it'll be fast. But it's inevitable. What's inconceivable is that it's going to remain the same, because the world is just moving on. And so we had applied information. I mean, we were in over 600 cities. I mean, that's inconceivable a couple of years back, when you said, well, actually what we're going to do is to provide specific software. So within applied information and our technology group, we maintain one version of software versus 600 versions of software, which was the old model. Now, for those of you who've experienced people loading new software, but it didn't work with that version of server, and well, it was that version of Windows, or that version of that, and it was all became difficult, and it took you a while to upgrade the software. The ultimate cloud computing software, if you think about it like this, is SpaceX's Starlink satellite constellation, where they put 400 or more satellites up now, and they're putting up 60 at a time. SpaceX is a pretty interesting company in terms of they just do whatever they do. They don't worry too much about asking permission. And so they put their software team up on Ask Me Anything on Reddit. And the interesting thing is that people asked all kinds of questions, some of which they could answer and some of which were proprietary. But they said they send new software to their Starlink satellite fleet every week. Once a week, they update the software in the whole constellation. And that's the pace of change and the confidence in their change process that SpaceX have with Starlink. Now, I'm not suggesting you change the software in the transportation once a week, but I certainly would suggest that this is the business of being able to do over-the-air software updates to your whole infrastructure, deliver applications that you didn't think about when they were installed. That's all part of this model. So an outcomes-based contract would say, and there would be oversight to say the supplier must be able to deliver over-the-air software updates, and most importantly, roll them back to the previous version in case something goes wrong. And most importantly, number two, have a qualification process so that the customer knows that the over-the-air software update process is secure and properly tested before it goes out. So that gets into the oversight software, that part of it, the role for consultants and so forth, that is not really manifest today, because today it tends to be, I buy a piece of equipment, and whatever software it's got is the software that it's going to live with. That's how the motor car industry works, until Tesla came along and said, no, not so fast. We're going to actually change the software the whole time.
That's all great points. Jessica, do we have any questions over there outstanding for us?
We do.
Uh-oh.
So the first one is saying, it's a long one, so follow me. Daryl Thomas is asking, outcomes-based contracting is a huge mindset change for the public sector, who are in the business of buying tangible assets to perform a function and still owning these assets down the line. The trick is to conceive the city fathers that it is only necessary to hire the service or function today without having anything to show for this money spent tomorrow. I had this experience once, and this narrow mindset killed the project from the outset. How do you propose getting around this hurdle?
Great point, Daryl. Thanks for checking in. That's probably the most complicated problem of all. The technology, we kind of got that. But what it's going to involve, it's going to involve a change of mindset. Now, for the folks who've been doing things a certain way and built their careers about doing it a certain way, let's say the folks who built a QPL list and engineering evaluation process for a city or a state. There are two factors. The first one is the political process. Now, it's thought of quite dimly, in quite a poor light, that companies like ourselves would engage with the politicians and explain to them what the future is going to look like. But that's the old way of thinking, and it's changing. And any number of city managers, I stand up with the mayor, I stand up with the city manager at their town council meeting, and I explain, this is the new system that you guys got, and this is what it's going to do, and this is the benefits. And so we're engineers. We have to get out of the mindset that the city's buying the technology for a technology reason. That's a dreadful reason to buy technology. So what we have to do is all focus on, we're buying technology for the benefit. And we're buying technology for the benefit of the citizens. And we and the technical folks stand up together and project that same consistent message. Now there are going to be winners and losers and competition, and you're going to get some and you're not going to get some. But it has to be a team effort between the political class in the cities and the counties, and that is going to involve outreach by everybody. It's going to involve the administrators of the DOT or the city department, and not everybody's going to buy into this, so they're going to be early adopter cities. And we're going to work like crazy with those cities to make sure it's successful, and then everybody can point to that. So not everybody's an early adopter. And so I do understand that. But we're going to have to embrace and understand that people are resistant to change. So don't try and sell this concept to the most conservative DOT out there. They're not ready. It's just a hard sell. You've got to have the politicians ready. You've got to have the DOTs ready. You've got to have the consultants ready to support this with writing appropriate RFPs or RFIs, requests for information. The city desires to make the street safer for pedestrians. Guys, come and give me teams of costs for a pilot and costs for the city to be able to implement safety technologies. So that's a skill from the consulting community, which we still have to develop, and we all have to develop that. And then lastly is the skills from companies like ourselves, who the fact that we see the future in such clear terms, well, everybody just thinks I'm crazy. I mean, there's a fair groundswell of people who think, what on earth is Bryan and Applied Information doing now? Not only are they trying to develop new products, but we're trying to re-engineer the contracting process. And that's dead right, we are. But what we have to do is accept that folks are going to have this in a series of steps where we can point to success so that everybody's not betting their career on unproven thing. And secondly, it's going to take teams of like-minded companies like ourselves and the contractors and the distributors and the installers who can perform, do outcomes-based contracting, meet performance measures without the adversarial and the micromanaging that's involved in the adversarial civil engineering method of contract. So, Daryl, to answer your question, it's a 4-step process. Involve the political class. Let's make sure they're on board. Involve the administrators, the DOTs, the various folks at that level. Make sure they're on board and accept that some are ahead of the others. Involve the consulting community, so they're champions for the new process and they're selling their expertise in this process and adding value in oversight and writing the specs and so forth. And fourthly is educating the teams of players who are going to have to support this and embrace this new future. And you don't have to look very far. You look at companies like Ericsson and Nokia. Nokia, I mean, everybody had a flip Nokia phone, which nobody could see a future without Nokia being in the handset business. So this change is coming, and those are the 4 steps. Long answer, Jessica, but you got another question there.
So we have someone asking, are there any downsides of these new contract types?
No. Let me think about that a bit more. No, still no. And the reason being is that delivering the outcome that the city or the citizens need is what we're trying to do. And we've sort of just stumbled across technology and deployed it as best we can, generally turning our customs into systems integrators in the process. Now, there are some risks, and the risk is that the city's not comfortable with it, and so consequently, has half in and half out and writes a bad contract. The risk is that the administrators and the politicians in turn have a disconnect. They're not communicating clearly that, wow, we both see this vision together and it involves the political class giving the administrative class some cover. Yeah, we're going to spend all this money and we're not going to get any assets for it. We're going to get services for it. You can't have somebody blindsiding the administrators. Likewise, there's risks that the consultants that you hire are not experienced in this. And they're trying their best, but they're frightened of this, and so they push back or they don't do a good job. And then lastly, the risk is that you hire a contracting team for the provision of these services who actually just doesn't understand it, and they're trying to actually supply assets without really understanding that they're committed to a certain level of service and they're committed to certain outcomes. And the reason also why I say there's no risk is don't be frightened about just putting an outcomes-based contract on the street. If the private sector feels there's too much risk in that contract, they just won't bid it. Or they'll price it very high, or they'll qualify it. There's plenty of ways of dealing with it. But in principle, the risk is, and the downside is preserving the status quo. And when you preserve the status quo, we end up with not deploying connected vehicles, not deploying these advanced technologies, not deploying transit signal priority, not deploying many of the technologies which are now well proven, which will save lives and improve the traffic.
Thanks, Brian. That's some pretty good answers there to a lot of great questions. Thank you, everyone. The fourth thing that we were going to talk about today was the Internet of Things. What do you mean by that?
The Internet of Things is a term that came up any number of years ago, 10 years ago, or whatever, and it describes this environment where everything connected to everything changes everything. Now, that has led us to a point of now folks talking about the massive Internet of Things, where everything has got a sensor in it. And in fact, there's some not bad illustrations from the SpaceX and the launch on the that we saw 10 days ago. All those beautiful displays in the cockpit, and the comparatively few buttons that there are. I saw a crack on Twitter which said the reason why there were no buttons in the SpaceX cockpit is because Boeing had already bought all of them to put in the Starliner. Whereas you look at Starliner, it's a very traditional cockpit with lots of buttons and switches. And the point being is that the software which runs those displays is Chromium. It's a web services display. It's actually running web components for the visualization of what's going on inside the rocket. When you look at the Starlink satellite, it's got 40 microprocessors in it. And the way they do microprocessors is that they each do a comparatively simple thing. They're all time synchronized, they all can talk to each other, and they all run Linux. They run the same software as the traffic controller up the street. So does all that when you saw the rocket landing, all those microprocessors run Linux. They run the same software operating system as the ATC. So there's no fundamental difference in these technologies, and the Internet of Things is really the concept that when everything connected to everything changes everything. Now, you get various folks in DOTs and things, very well-meaning folks, saying, well, what I want to do is to get into designing what those microprocessors do, and this microprocessor does that, and so forth, and you end up with specifications that take 10 years to write and are obsolete by the time they hit the street. And so what I just encourage in this process is that focus the specifications on interfaces and oversight. How are you going to demonstrate that it does what you say it's going to do, and what's the interface to the rest of the world? How are we going to talk to the cars? How are we going to, but get away from how the things are built. That you end up being obsolete the day you put the spec on the street.
So how does that actually, how does the Internet of Things reduce costs for an agency?
It's all about shared infrastructure. I'll illustrate with an example from applied information. For those of you who opened up our boxes and so forth, you know that we use the same microprocessor in all our different products. Some small, some as small as this. This is our new Internet of Things product to do, low power monitoring, to the larger devices that do connected vehicles and things like that. But the way we do that is that approximately 90% of the code that runs in that box, in a connected vehicle box, or a school beacon box, or a small box like this, 90% of the code is the same. How it talks to glance is the same. How it deals with monitoring the status of health and alarming and so forth. And so what you do by adopting this Internet of Things approach of the security that used by the Internet of Things allows us to implement the highest level of security at the lowest cost. because it's used widely. And if we try to invent our own security, for example, it would cost millions of dollars. But that's where we built on this platform and this concept of widely distributed microprocessors all talking to each other, all using connectivity to connect to a cloud service, and all delivering services to the user by alerts and alarms, reports, and so forth on a shared basis. And that's really the Internet of Things. It's a bit of jargon, a bit of buzzword, but it's everything connected to everything, changes everything. And that's why we as a company, we focused on applications, doing real things, and deployment. Let's find folks who want to do the real things that we do.
And these little devices, I mean, this has got a cellular modem in it, right?
Sure.
So, you using shared services, right? In terms of you using a shared cellular platform that I use on my mobile phone.
Correct. And that's quite profound. And it's actually more profound when one thinks, because actually the interface to the modem is actually the same interface as to fiber. That the transport and the messages are all the same. And what happens is that we get hung up about which kind of radio, which kind of fiber, or what the transport is. But actually, when we deal with messages at an application level, you can design these messages to support all these different things. And so sometimes we use fiber and sometimes we use a cell. And Glance wouldn't be able to tell the difference about how the message got transferred. And that's the power of this level. It's called abstraction. I mean, I could do a separate show on abstraction, but what everything's done is built in layers. And what you do is you build your application layers on top of lower layers, which we get taken care of in this shared infrastructure. And that's what the future is going to be, because I use the example of that it's approaching it's a public figure that's approaching $1 billion that we've spent on connected vehicles so far, in terms of pilots and consultants, and getting as far as we've gotten, the big argument we've got, and still not deployed in any cars. And the business of, well, it's potentially looking likely that we can cover every one of America's traffic intersections on a shared basis. Whether they've got connectivity or not doesn't matter. With some new concepts we're going to talk about in a separate show called virtualization and things like that. But there's many things covering that we can cover the whole of the United States infrastructure and make it all connected for less than $1 billion.
Okay. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So what I would like to do is ask you, what are the 3 key takeaways you want everybody to be thinking about?
The first one, the future is scary, but don't be scared, because there's no alternative but to embrace it. So it's just like we learned, any number of new things. We learned to use a smartphone. We've learned new skills. Take it upon yourself to exchange with us, exchange with your consultants and your clients, and vice versa, and everybody. Talk to them and get trained up at what this means. And this is why one of the reasons why we stood up this the iATL, the Intersection Automotive Technology Laboratory, to provide a hub of how to do this and how to get everybody comfortable that these new technologies actually aren't scary. They're inevitable, and we have to embrace it. The second takeaway, and this is going to be whether you're a provider, a distributor, or whether you're a consultant, or whether you're a city, do something small to get going, because it's actually much less scary if you've got some experience under your belt. So accept that this is going to be my first foray into doing whatever the application. In fact, I'd go and ask your mayor, what is most important, the number one customer complaint? We got some counties here, for example, that said a number one complaint is where the school beacons go on and off at the right time. So fine, let out a design, build, operate, and maintain contract for your school beacons, based on some of these things. And so this is how one can actually get one's feet wet in a small way. But the third takeaway is, obviously you can see that I'm really passionate about it. If you want to challenge me or challenge us or work with NEMA, we've got an outcomes-based contract program in NEMA. There are lots of outlets where folks can participate in this new future. And if you participate in the future, it's not so scary. The hardest thing for everybody is just when you feel the future is leaving you behind, and then you rail against it, you try and stop it. And that's literally like holding back the tide.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
I did want to reach out to everybody. If you guys are looking at wanting to get a little bit more one-on-one time with us and Brian, please contact training@appinfoinc.com or sales@appinfoinc.com. Reach out to myself and set it up. We've got this whole lab behind us for a reason, for us to educate people and to bring them in and actually have that more one-on-one conversation, to actually look at kind of what problems different cities are having, reaching out with the consultants to talk about these new types of contracts so that we can all collaborate and bring up the right solution. So please reach out to us, and look forward to talking to everyone at the next show. So thank you so much for joining us today.